Okay, year 11. So let's return to our animal farm question. We've got our quotes that we put down on the page, so this is what we've got to work with. And from this, we really want to kind of take out those four big ideas, those four CALS paragraphs. We're going to be able to build up and trying to get as many marks as possible. So the way I think I might look at this is, because what I've noticed is it kind of works its way through the novel, which is something that can be quite nice to look at, actually, if we can kind of show not just that we know the character, we can see kind of how the character changes and develops throughout the novel. So I think I'm going to start with the idea that he had a reputation and that he was fierce looking. I might tie these two together because this is actually from early on in the novel. This is what we're told in our very initial meeting with Napoleon, and we hear that he's got a reputation, so already, prior to the revolution, already he's known on the farm. And also the fact he's fierce looking. All right? And I like this, I like the adjective fierce. I like this idea that he's known as this, but he's not just fierce, he's fierce looking. So it's the fact he presents himself. He knows that actually part of control, and if we come back to the question, let's not forget it's about a ruthless leader. Part of what's going to build him up into being a ruthless leader is the fact that he knows he has to be seen to be a ruthless leader. He knows that intimidation is all going to be part of this. So I'm just going to put like that. I'm going to drop down that it's going to be in the exposition. So I'm going to get that word in there because I really like that word. In the exposition, it's already established, okay, that he knows it's going to be established that Napoleon will rely on intimidation and the way he is viewed. Because remember, I think one of the we talk about Napoleon and Snowball. We talk about Snowball being intellectual, but in many ways we're going to talk about Napoleon being a genius at some things. And I think one of those things is he understands that it's about what people see you as, and I think we get that at the very beginning. I think it's also something we can throw in there is that the dogs are also said to be fierce looking. So it's this idea that he knows that he needs people to be scared of him. Actually, that fear will be part of the control that he puts in place as a ruthless leader. So that's Napoleon at the beginning. Then we have a look at our quotes and we think to ourselves, we've got this placing himself in front of the buckets, and that happens on the very first day of the revolution. So it's only just happened. And then we have Napoleon. The milk has just been milk from the cows. The animals think this is the moment when we're going to see kind of communism or animalism in effect for the first time, because we've now got these buckets of milk, and the assumption made by the animals is it's going to be shared out fairly, as in the kind of the 7 commandments. And then just at that moment, we have this moment when Napoleon walks forward and he's placing himself in front of the buckets. And I think the word I really want to talk about, the one that I think Orwell chose, which is what we're looking for in language, is placing. I love the verb placing because there's a deliberateness about it. It's this idea that, again, much like the first point, everything he does is purposeful. He doesn't accidentally find himself in front of the buckets. He clearly puts himself as a barrier between the wealth and the animals. If we remember that on Animal Farm, it's meant to be everyone is equal. But from the very first moment, again, in the exposition, he's establishing the fact that he is going to be the barrier. He is the ruthless leader. There is the animals and there is him, and it's a divide. Okay, so I'm really going to talk about this. So I'm going to really make the point about him that it's this idea that he establishes, and I'm using that word again, right? He establishes that he will control. He will control access. He will control information. It's kind of the first step in his leadership is that access, information, and rules. In other words, Napoleon is the one who is going to be the one who makes the rules up. It's not going to be all animals are equal. Already, we think about that last phrase, all animals are equal except some are more equal than others. Well, we can trace that all the way back in many ways to this moment when you have the careful placement of Napoleon in front of the buckets.
And that's typical of Stalinist society. And what should be a utopian moment of the rebellion has become its total opposite. I think you mentioned the phrase.
Yes, we could. Yes, it could be. We could see it as the foreshadowing of the dystopia. Right, so in this moment of celebration, the animals are gambolling around the farm, having a wonderful time, looking at all they own. Even in this moment of utter utopia, when everything is perfect and everything could be wonderful, we have this little moment. And really, if you think about all the terrors that come in the book, you can trace it all back to this moment, the idea that he placed himself in front of the book. He placed himself in front of in front of the utopia. Everything from this moment onwards is going to be a case of him controlling access, him controlling the animals in terrible, oppressive ways. So we can boil it all the way back to this point. And then we're going to jump forward a bit, and we're kind of, I suppose, if these were the hints at what was to come, we're going to have the moment when the true horror and the true limitlessness of him as a leader and the ruthlessness of him as a leader is realised, and when we have the pile of corpses, all right, that are lying beneath his feet. So this moment in the novel when Napoleon has been challenged and a few people have kind of offered suggestions that he's not doing the right thing, the hens have refused to give over their eggs and kind of to kind of pay them back for this and to regain his control. You've got this moment when Napoleon decides that he's going to remove all of his enemies, and suddenly with the dogs and mimicking the Moscow show trials, we have this moment when animal after animal is brought forward, any animal that's ever argued against or tried to in any way kind of contradict anything that Napoleon's ever said.
Starting crucially with the pigs, it's the four porkers. First of all, it's his own kind, just like Stalin took out his own closest enemies, first of all, in the Bolshevik party. The Bolsheviks are the pigs, and he's taking out the pigs who are a threat to his power and control.
And we end up with this gruesome image of again, this is the revelation. We kind of have the revelation of the utter ruthlessness. Up till this point, it's been a lot of propaganda. There's been a lot of threat. There's been a lot of intimidation. But this is the moment when we realise that it isn't an idle threat. We realise the fact that he will go to any lengths to achieve. He will kill his own kind. He will kill. He will break the commandments. He will have throats ripped out by his dogs. So we see the utter ruthlessness of him. And again, I think when we're looking at this, a lot of people will tend to talk about the noun corpses, which I understand. But in many ways, I actually think we can talk about. It's the pile, okay? It's the fact that these corpses are in a pile. It's the dehumanizing or deanimalizing, but let's call it dehumanizing. But it's the dehumanizing effect of this. It's the fact that if you're an enemy of Napoleon, or really if you're any animal on the farm, because he's so self-centered, you are not a person, or you're a thing. You're a thing that can be disposed of, that you can pile up and push to one side. So it's this idea that we really get to see where his priorities lie. His priorities aren't in looking after the animals or caring about the animals or animalism or anything like that. They are all just things that are to be used or murdered should the need arise. And again, we can really tie that back to the fact he's utterly ruthless. And I suppose this is the moment when the ruthlessness is confirmed.
And the pile, sort of, in amongst that dehumanisation, that pile of corpses is a few dozen animals, but sort of symbolising the 20 million or so million people that Stalin was estimated to have had executed on his orders or sent to death camps and labour camps in Siberia over his 30 years of rule. It didn't happen as quickly as this, but the pile of corpses is meant to represent the ridiculous body count, the obscene body count in Stalin's Russia.
And then we find ourselves at the end of the book. So again, this is a wonderful answer, and it's not something you can always do with every answer, but what actually we find ourselves is we're working our way through the book with this character. So we're going to go to something that happens at the quite close to the very end of the book, when we see that he carried a whip in his trotter. Okay, so we have this moment when we see Napoleon, he's walking on hind legs, he's wearing clothes, he carried a whip in his trotter. Okay, and this is kind of that moment of confirmation. He's kind of come full circle. If we remember the noun whip, and we'll talk about this because it's not the only language feature, but the noun whip, it's symbolic. Okay, remember, one of the first things they do when they get rid of Jones at the very beginning is they burn the whips and all the other paraphernalia of what is used to control and oppress animals. But really, it's the whip that is the image that we are left with, the burning whip at the beginning that shows that they will never be controlled that way again. So by having this at the end, we get the cyclical narrative. All right, Orwell is kind of showing us that we've kind of come full circle. And I think to make that even worse, if you think about the whip and the trotter, they're two nouns, but we could talk about the juxtaposition. All right, so not only is it terrible that the symbol of oppression is now being used again, it's the fact that it's an animal using it, which makes it so much worse. Because actually, if we go back to Old Major's speech, it's the case of the humans were the enemy. So before it was the enemy using it, but now it's actually one of their own kind doing it. So I think at the end, we find out that he's like Jones.
Major asked all the animals not to resemble man, and he also, in Beasts of England, had the line, "Cruel whips no more shall crack." So there is this sense of the cyclical ending. We started with whips and now we're ending with it.
So if we think it's like Jones at the beginning, but actually in many ways it's worse. So let's put but worse. All right, he's more ruthless. And Mr. Jones was terrible and oppressive, but again he was a bit useless. He didn't really know what he was doing. Whereas actually with Napoleon it's much worse because everything is thought through, everything is purposeful, everything is kind of its tactics. I say he's more ruthless, more thought out, and ultimately, ultimately you've got an image of he's a totalitarian dictator, but yeah, a tyrant. This is a malevolent. Let's call him a malevolent tyrant.
Even on the subject of drinking, we know that Jones was too drunk to remember. Jones was an alcoholic, okay, an incompetent leader, a bit like the Tsar Nicholas II of Russia was out of touch with his people. But Napoleon, even his drinking is something systematic. It's something when he wants to drink, he decides to trade in his most successful sort of worker. When he trades in boxer for a crate of whiskey, everything is expendable, everything is manipulated, even to benefit when he's feeling thirsty and potentially wanting to break the commandment about alcohol.
So ultimately what you're left with is a wonderful answer, if we do say so ourselves, about ruthless leader. Because not only are we offering how Napoleon's a ruthless leader, but we're almost kind of charting his rise as ruthless leader. We're talking about how he started out and kind of how that developed and how the ruthlessness is shown and kind of how it ends. And they will love that, the exam board, because not only do we show we know 4 quotes, we're actually going to show that we know the book and we can chart the change in the character, which is something that they are big fans of.
And it's also charting the rise of Stalin along the way, so your context can easily be built up